Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mori muluwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is helping us celebrate Native American Awareness Month. Her name is Traci Sorell, and her book is called We Are Still Here. Before we invite our guests into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by the books of author Melissa Lyons. I Will Always Love You, and Until We Meet Again. You know, helping a friend or a loved one find hope and love in the midst of their grief and loss is one of the most compassionate gifts we can share. When someone you know has suffered a loss, especially when there are grieving children involved, there are two transformational and healing books you can give them. These books offer comfort and words of wisdom from a realm beyond our own. Whether the loss is human or an animal companion, the books I Will Always Love You and Until We Meet Again will be a welcome addition to those looking for a sense of reassurance and possibly a sign that their loved ones are still looking out for them. See me in your dreams and in your mind's eye. Imagine me free and able to fly. Those are the words from our sponsor, Melissa Lyons. For more information about her books, I Will Always Love You and Until We Meet Again, please visit her website, melissa-lyons.com. Joining us right now from the Cherokee Nation, located in the state of Oklahoma. Our guest today is here to celebrate a beautiful book. It's called We Are Still Here. Please welcome to the show, Traci Sorell. Hey, Traci, how are you?
Otto, thank you for having me. I'm super, super excited to be here and to visit about books and just life in general.
Now, I think you greeted me in your native tongue. How did you greet me?
Yes, I said wado, or I said thank you in Cherokee.
Wado.
Normally, though, when I introduce myself, I will say Osio Traci Sorell Dagwadoa Jijalagi. And I'm saying, hello, my name is Traci Sorell, and I'm a Cherokee citizen.
You know, a lot of people probably don't realize that people who are members of Native American tribes have a dual citizenship. You are a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. You're also a citizen of the United States. I don't think many people understand that the different Native American tribes are sovereign nations within this nation. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works exactly?
Yes. I mean, that is one of the things when I do school visits or I do presentations with teachers and librarians that I start out with, because it's not something that even I, found in my education until I was paying for it when I went to college. So it's not something I expect people to be really familiar with or understand. But, let's just look at the facts, right? Native nations were, governing people, lands, resources. They had extensive trade routes all across this continent, from the Arctic to Antarctica, right? This entire land space has had Native nations and their citizens for tens of thousands of years. And so, we've debunked, or not say we, but, science has finally accepted that the Bering Strait theory is no more, et cetera. So we have these Native nations, and yet in our schools, what do we teach? Right? We will teach, they'll usually mention the debunked theory about Bering Strait. And then they kind of go right into 1492. And history starts when Columbus arrives. And it's like, no, it doesn't. There's a history that precedes that. And we have very rich culture, and there's writings about it. I mean, certainly, you can read Mayan codices and, Nawa story, all these different things that have been written about life prior to the arrival of Europeans. Europeans come here from a variety of countries and establish colonies. Some of those colonies later become states. Some of them morph into different things. But all of those nations signed treaties recognizing the government-to-government relationship with native nations and themselves. Spanish, English, French, Dutch, Portuguese, et cetera, right? The United States, when it is formed, and it's a very new country, right? We've only been around a little over 200 years. They have done the exact same thing as the European predecessors. They want to legitimize themselves as a nation state on that world stage. So they also sign treaties recognizing the government-to-government relationship they have with native nations. And we are separated out in the Constitution and all kinds of foundational documents that form the United States. So that's why I share with students that I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation first, because it precedes the formation of the United States. And then by, nature of the occupation and formation of the United States, then I'm a U.S. citizen second, because it's more recent in nature. And so that helps them understand. I use a pyramid structure where I show native nations at the top. And then later is, like I say, these colonies that become states under what is the federal United States country.
Now, for folks, again, who haven't had a chance to visit the Cherokee Nation, when what would I experience as I drove into the Cherokee Nation? Would I see signs? Would I have to go through a border?
You would absolutely see signs. So you would be coming into, basically the northwest corner of Oklahoma is the Cherokee Nation, with the exception of a small portion at the very, very extreme northeast corner, where 7 smaller native nations live. But any highway will say you're entering the Cherokee Nation. And then when you get to the end of our border, it will say you're leaving the Cherokee Nation. We also have welcome centers. So in essence, like you would drive into a new state and you might stop at a rest area in a welcome center. Well, within our boundaries, those are staffed by us. So when you come into Oklahoma, the welcome center is the Cherokee Nation Welcome Center that's welcoming you to our nation. We have a very robust tourism program. And so there are tours that the Cherokee Nation tourism staff provide. We have a number of museums and cultural sites that people can visit. And so it's really a wonderful place, because you can come in and see what traditionally has been called green country. That's what the northeast corner of Oklahoma is called, because it is very lush, very treed, lots of rivers and man-made lakes from those rivers, because they've been dammed. I love it. I love it here.
Well, you can see how much you love it in your smile as you're speaking about it. And as I understand it, you wrote, "We are still here," to kind of to let people know about about your people.
Yeah. It's, Charles Bridge, my publisher, has talked about it being a companion piece to my very first book, which is We Are Grateful, Ojali Haliga. And that book really was centered on us as Cherokee people today, just like living our lives and how we're taught to express gratitude, whether that's, being thankful for things that are wonderful, but also being taught to be grateful for hardships and things that are difficult. And that's across the season. So we have our New Year coming up very shortly here in the fall. But I wanted, readers of that book to look at, okay, but what is the larger structure that the Cherokee Nation and its citizens live within? And what I found was, as a child myself, that schools within texts and often the books that we were given to read, showed native nations in general, not just the Cherokee people, as completely disappeared by 1900. We don't exist in the textbook, and what's mentioned of that beforehand is maybe a few paragraphs here and there. So I thought, okay, well, what happens if I write a book that gives upper elementary students who start doing units about native nations a book that talks about, okay, let's start in 1871 when treaty making ends. Diplomacy still continues between the U.S. government and native nations as it does today. Tribal leaders are constantly in D.C., meeting with the president, meeting with agency secretaries, doing visits on the Hill, testifying before the Senate and the House, et cetera, right? This is like normal everyday business. But kids don't know this. Most adults don't know this. And so I wanted a book that brought us from 1871, when treaty making stops, to the present. So there's 12 different themes in We Are Still Here that lay that out in a very accessible way. There's a timeline in the back that you can dive into for more information. But again, what is the entry point? You know, there hasn't been an entry point. Like, there will be books for later junior high, maybe teens, but nothing that really helps you come in at that entry level and then go to what I would call a more detailed reading later. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I wanted to do, was to provide that, because I didn't get that overview, like I say, until I went to college. You know, I knew what had happened to the Cherokee Nation. I didn't even know all the things that had happened to us, right, until I started reading even more of our history and kind of systematically how things had happened to us. But what I realized in looking at all the different Native nations was, you know what? Even with difficult times in our histories, collective or individual, like, tribes have always exercised agency. They have always spoken up, and they have always been a presence in Washington, D.C., as well as, you know, locally. And they've always been working to take care of their citizens. And again, that is not what we see or read in the history books, even though it's fact, right? I mean, there's plenty of historical, you know, and current evidence for this. And so that's where the title We Are Still Here comes from. Now, on some of the double page spreads in the book, you see this reoccurring, you know, phrase throughout the book. But in some of them, I mean, that We Are Still Here is like literally, especially during times of assimilation, where you've got the boarding schools and children are being forcibly removed from their parents and taken to government or religious run boarding schools. You know, that We Are Still Here refrain is really just survival. Mm-hmm. But then there are other times in the book where the We Are Still Here is an emphatic and very strong place of activism and hope. And so I think the reader, you know, gets that as they read through the book, that there really are ebbs and flows in terms of, you know, what Native people and the nations, their governments have experienced, but ultimately there is agency. Mm-hmm. And that's what's missing from history books, is our existence and our agency. A lot of times we want to focus just on victimhood and things that have happened. And that's definitely, there have been some horrific things that have been done. There's no question about that. At the same time, we have also been, you know, very active in speaking out about those things. And also at times, when necessary, going to, like I say, DC and saying, here's what we need done. Mm-hmm. You know, here's what you need to pass. Here's our experience. You know, don't tell us what we need. We know what we need. Here's the data. Here's the stories to show that to you. And so I just wanted that represented and available to, like I say, a younger group of people than typically it has been.
Yeah. Really, really important. And I want to dig deeper into that, you know, giving folks a chance to see the reality of Native tribes, Native nations today. It's so important. We talk about books being windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. For kids living in the Cherokee Nation, what do you think the response might be when they sit down and read We Are Still Here?
Well, the first thing is, I think it will be eye-opening for many of them, especially if they're attending public schools. I mean, we know for our Native students nationwide, well over 90% of them attend public schools. So this isn't anything that they're going to have read in their public schools. Now, the book is set in terms of the artwork. You know, we framed it to where, like, students were at a school giving these presentations. And we did that because there are tribal schools that have their own curriculum, and there are publicly chartered schools with a majority of, you know, Native students that have our history and what has really happened as part of the curriculum. They've done that work. So I think for many Cherokee students, they would still be as surprised as anyone else, you know, to look at the larger systematic way Native people have been treated because they are not learning that in school, where they're at currently. And their parents and, other family members may not even realize, how systematic some of these policies have been. But I know that for many families, it sparks discussions about, yes, actually your grandparents were relocated and that's why we live, in Dallas or San Francisco or, Cleveland, et cetera. So because we have Cherokee people that live all over the place. We have at-large satellite communities that are officially, connected to the Cherokee Nation, and the chief and staff go out and do cultural programming and meet with them. They have 2 tribal council members that represent their interests within the nation. And so those come from federal policies, that moved people out, as well as, some are like veterans of wars and they came back and settled in cities instead of returning home. But there was an actual federal program, in the 1950s and 60s that moved a lot of Native people, including many Cherokee people, outside. And so it's a way to share those family stories as much as it is to just provide, like I say, that 60,000 foot level view. They'll know what has happened in their community, or within the Cherokee Nation. But I'm finding that it's also providing linkages for grandparents and other family members and community members to talk with young people about their experiences with these programs.
It is really important to have those conversations, and I love that this book is something that really encourages those intergenerational conversations. And one of the things I love as you're speaking and just acknowledging that there are so many people, adults and kids, who don't know this information, I loved when my kids and I would sit down and read a book, and we both kind of sit there and look at each other afterwards going, I didn't know that. Let's find out more.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite things to do with my son. That I think has been the best part of, one of the best parts of being a writer, because I love meeting other young people and hearing their thoughts about things, is the fact that, I've read to him since he was in the womb. And so many times I'll be reading something and I think, wow, I had no idea about this. And then his interests and where they take me, So we have lots of wonderful discussions that would never have happened without that book, being in my lap and reading it to him. Mm-hmm. So I truly have cherished those times. I mean, but that goes back to my own childhood. Some of my absolute favorite memories as a child is my mother telling us stories and reading to us before mm-hmm. bed.
Yeah.
It's just absolute uninterrupted time together. One of, like, as you say, learning something new, sharing a laugh, sharing memories, all the things that are prompted by just being together and reading.
Yeah. One of the things you said in referencing your first book was that it's important to be thankful for hardships. Mm. Can you expand on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Cherokee people in general have a concept about living in balance, right? And so balance doesn't necessarily, mean that everything's going to be wonderful all the time, right? I mean, there's always, just as some days we feel wonderful, other days we wake up with aches and pains. And so the point of, that teaching about our gratitude is there are going to be difficult seasons, right? There are going to be difficult days, and you need to understand that. And certainly I think that the book has been helpful to many families during the pandemic to, say, okay, even though this is a hardship, right? And this is difficult, and our routines and the way we socialize and the way we, work and educate and do all these things is very difficult. There are some silver linings, right? We can all find some things that have been better, right? That we may not have acknowledged before. For myself, it has been difficult to take my son out of the school district and homeschool him for now going on the second year. I was never intending to do that. I have a full-time job. My husband has a full-time job. thankfully he's good at math and science, and I can cover English and social studies. But it has given us the ability to have a more relaxed schedule as a family. And the fact that we can my husband also works from home, so we can gather for lunch together midday, which is, really nice to just kind of check in. And I'm able to use my public library and have my son read, I know, books that he would never get to in the classroom, simply because there's just too much with the text and so much with testing. So being able, I'm grateful to be in the kidlit world and to know who are, the wonderful creators that are putting out great literature. So I can, request the library buy those books, and then I go and check them out and share them with him. So like I say, there are definitely some wonderful benefits that way, and just more time with family, in general has been good.
Yeah, I think that's something really important for us to help our kids understand, is that life is filled with ups and downs. I know one of the things I've talked about here on the podcast is because my daughter and I toured so much together when she was younger, and when you're on the road traveling from town to town, things are going to happen. And very quickly, she learned that, when we're in the middle of that thing that happened, the car broke down, we arrive at a hotel and the reservation we're not in the right hotel. We're supposed to be in the Holiday Inn 60 miles away from here. The attitude is, this is going to make a great story. It's a pain in the neck right now. We really don't want to be dealing with this. But, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be able to laugh at this and learn from it.
No, absolutely. I had the exact same thing happen this summer. I was coming back from visiting friends up on reservation in North Dakota, and it was just my son and I. And so I knew that the car was getting low on gas, but I was like, oh, I know there's a gas station. We're like so close to Omaha, so there's a gas station, and we'll stop at the next one. And clearly it had been a while since I had been on that road, because that was not the case. I needed to get quite close, like in Omaha to get to a gas station. And so I have never driven with the car on E and known what the capacity was to go past E. And because I went for almost 10 miles past E and made it to the gas station, but we were both sweating bullets, and I was trying so hard to be, grateful. I just kept thinking, okay, I kept saying, wado, thank you, unelana e, which is our word for creator, or the one who, in Cherokee, it's the one who provides all. It's like this, I appreciate that there's still gas in this car. I don't know if I'm running on fumes, but we didn't end up having to push it. I was able to get to the gas station, but I was like, oh, wow, because I didn't remember how rural southeastern South Dakota and northeastern Nebraska was. And so it just snuck up on me. But, we both had laughs out of it much later, of course, not at that time. But, so there's just things like that where you say, okay, and then there are other, hardships that, especially, one of the passages in that book is, being grateful, for a family member that, you've lost them they've passed on, but you always have those memories, and you always have those gifts, of who they were, and what they shared with you that you have for the rest of your life. And, I know with so many people experiencing losses this year of loved ones, that, that's sometimes hard to think of as, a silver lining, but it's like, you do need to focus on, how your life has been, enriched by them being with you. And, so that's, that may take a while sometimes to get there, but it's definitely the flip side of the loss is focusing on, the love, the memories, and the gifts that they were given that were shared with you.
One more thing I want to just touch on in terms of helping people understand. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of controversy. One of the senators from Massachusetts got embroiled and in a controversy about her citizenship within one of the nations. And one of the things that came out is that unlike the way we think of an Irish American is somebody whose parents directly came from Ireland, citizenship within a native nation isn't just dependent on bloodlines. Am I right about that? Did I remember that right?
Basically every native nation determines their citizen. And yeah, you're talking about Senator Warren, who's actually, from Oklahoma, and she claimed she was Cherokee. And, that isn't who her family is, right? She's descended from various European folks. And so it really depends on, like I say, the native nation. Each one is sovereign in determining who their membership is. And this has been, repeatedly recognized by the U.S. government, that it is not their purview. It's not their legal dominion to say anything about that. And so some native nations say if you are the descendant of people that are from this tribe, some say if your father is or your mother. Some tribes have the ability to adopt others into the tribe. So it just depends, and like I say, there is definitely no one size fits all type of thing. But, a lot of people can claim native ancestry, but it's also who claims you back. Does that native nation claim you? And I know there are issues around disenrollment. You can't ever be disenrolled in the Cherokee Nation, at least as our Constitution stands now. So if you're an enrolled citizen, you're an enrolled citizen. And, if you have an ancestor on the Dawes Rolls that you claim lineal descendancy to, and that can be proven, then you're an enrolled citizen.
This is really, it's really fascinating. And I think the thing that's most fascinating about it is how little we know.
Right. Again, it goes back to that education, right? Obviously we know, how the United States accepts citizenship, right? And, what you have to do to be a U.S. citizen. We will talk about that in school. Not to a great extent. I don't know that kids really know all the ins and outs of that. But like I say, we don't even give students a basic framework or families a basic framework of what, the history and experiences and contemporary realities and contributions are of native nations. And so why would anyone understand this? You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just part of that whole invisibility on so many fronts. And so I'm grateful that there are more books available. Many more are needed. There's starting to be more of a presence within media, and that can only help all of us. Right? We all are better community members with each other, and we're all better citizens of our respective nationalities if we are informed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you for informing us. I know that you have a new book coming out in the spring, and I just want to tease it because I want you to come back and have another conversation, talk about that new book. But just, can you let us know the title of that new book?
Yes, it's called Powwow Day, and it's illustrated by Cherokee Nation citizen Madeline Goodnight. It'll be published by Charles Bridge on February 8th, and it's a fiction book. So this year I had 2 nonfiction books come out. Next year will be my year of fiction picture books, but it's about a young girl who loves to dance at the powwow with her family, and she's recovering from a serious illness. And so she doesn't quite have the strength to do what she wants to do, and to be able to participate. And so it's about community. It's about vulnerability. And, again, kind of finding that silver lining when things don't go, always the way we want them to go.
Awesome.
Which I think is a big part of not just childhood, but life.
Yeah. Well, I know in the meantime, people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about We Are Still Here and find out more about Traci Sorell.
You're welcome to visit my website, Traci Sorell. That's TRACI, S as in Sam, ORELL.com. And there are pages about each of my books. you'll find free classroom guides and discussion guides. Some books have free coloring pages if it's aimed at younger people. So any information there, as well as information about myself and certainly how to contact me in public events that I'm doing, virtual or in person. On social media, I'm active on Twitter and Instagram, and that is just the @ symbol, Traci Sorell, TraciSorell.
Awesome. We've had a wonderful and really enlightening time speaking to the author of We Are Still Here, Traci Sorell. Traci, thank you so much for being with us today.
Adele, thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Anika Denise. That'll be the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Traci Sorell. Please be sure to check out We Are Still Here. Also want to thank our sponsor, the Books of Melissa Lyons. Please be sure to check out Melissa's website. I want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Michael Murphy, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.